Okay then, so good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Applying Agile across the business webinar presented by John Moore. Before we start, I'd like to share some information with you on our Anywhere platform that we're using today. If you've ever participated in a LearnerSheet class before, you know this is our live virtual platform, and I'm just going to share the layout with you. As you can see on the top left-hand side, we have John, video link to John you can see on your screen. Below John is our chat box. This is where you can participate with questions or comments. In the top middle, you will see the presentation slides themselves, and below there are some poll questions which hopefully you've been responding to over the few minutes before we started today. Please take a moment to look at the polls, and if you haven't already filled them in, please do so. John is certified in a range of project, program, portfolio and agile certifications, so we're delighted to have him with us today. He's been an active consultant for over 20 years, supporting a wide spectrum of organisations and industries. I'll now hand over to John, and John's going to take us through today's webinar.
All right, thanks, Alison, and say good morning, afternoon, good evening, everybody from wherever you dialed in from. It's great to see you here. As Alison says, my background is an IT background and qualifications as Prince 2, PMP, and of course several Agile qualifications as well. And so this topic is, seems very important, applying Agile across the business. It seems to be the one that is on everybody's lips. The word Agile came about and everybody wants to become business Agile, but what does it actually mean? And we're seeing in the press already that people are now saying, well, is it do what we expect it to do? Does it work? Doesn't it work? A lot of discussion. So the trigger of this particular webinar was that, very from experience and our own experiences, plus in the training room, there are a lot of questions that seem to be coming up that were very similar, like, well, how do we actually adopt Agile? What does it mean? What does it give us? What's the benefits? And quite a lot of sort of conflicting information. So we put it together to say, so what about the business culture itself? What must be in place? Because culture and the environment, now we're in a global world. It's even companies, it can change from one region to the other. What about adopting something new when we've got to maintain business as usual? Companies can't afford to take their eye off the ball, especially in our current circumstances with what's happened in the last couple of years with COVID. I mean, it's, the business have got to recognize they've got to survive. So is Agile the right way to go? Is it not the right way to go? What's the best approach? So we're going to look at, what challenges you were faced with about transforming to an Agile approach. What about the commitment and the mindset, and also the business case, which is the why? Because at the end of the day, if you're going to actually invest in an approach, you've got to get some benefit from it. So what's actually expected? So the first thing we're looking at is what is Agile? And we're going to take a little step backwards to see where it came from and what was the driving force behind it. And then we can see where we are now and see what can we do to get to where we want to get to, or rather, where do you want to get to? Because that's really the key question. It's not just about adapting or adopting a particular approach. It's a matter of saying, what do you want? What do you want to get to? And by you, I mean your business. And when I say the business, I mean the business you're in. So even if you're a non-profit making organization, you're still a business. Okay. So with that in mind, the first thing is, how do you sell Agile to the business? And this is really what came out as. If you go Agile, it's going to be cheaper, quicker, and it's better quality. Well, who would ever say no to that? I mean, you wouldn't, would you? We're going to get something what we want because it's cheaper than we thought we'd pay. We get it faster than we thought, and it's better quality. Now, we've got to look at it and say, well, can we actually achieve that? Is that really feasible? If that's the selling point, you're not going to say no. So what do we need to look at? Well, we need to look at three elements here. We need to look at the mindset. Because when we talk about things like quality, it can be quite subjective. I'm not talking about the measurement of it in terms of if we're looking at, so in the pharmacy industry, we're talking about if we're going to a restaurant, or we're looking at processes, or even looking at people. You know, when you go to a person and you're going to employ them, it's still, are they the right person for the job? So it's still a quality type of measure. So the mindset, though, has to be in place about delivering value, collaboration, learning as we go along, avoiding waste, adapting, reflecting on feedback. It's a matter of getting all that together. It's not about picking one, but it's finding the balance. And to support that, there are a number of frameworks. Now, I noticed on the poll you've already ticked some of what you've adopted, or thinking some haven't yet decided. But where do these frameworks come from, and what was the purpose of them? There's a lot of choice. And on top of that, we still have what I would call the traditional approaches, like the PMP, Prince 2. They're there, and they have their own variants, and they bring something to the party. But what do they bring? What do we need? What can we use with them? But where does Scrum and XP and all the others come from? But at the end of the day, the bottom one, the business agility, is what the business is aiming for. Because it's no longer just about software. It's about how can the business become agile. So there's a number of approaches that have been introduced, like Scaled Agile Framework, Disciplined Agile Delivery, Nexus, LESS, and others. So how does this all fit together? How can we make it all fit together? Can we just pick up on one and make it work, or do we have to look further afield? So the first thing is, if a business is going to adopt a new approach, in this case, Agile, then the question is why? Because it's going to cost money. It's, you know, no matter what you do, it's not like buying a product and putting it in and so plug and play, as most people think, not just for Agile, but for anything these days. It's actually changing the way the business is going to work. But why are you doing it? So with this environment now, we've got this area where it's, say, dynamic. It's the nature and speed of change, the volatility. We don't know what's around the corner. And it's not just changing in a technical sense, it's changing the way people are. Take the COVID situation. More and more people are much more comfortable using video conferencing where they weren't before. That's still change. We've got to expect that. Lack of predictability. Well, we know that as well. We don't know what's around the corner. We just mentioned about the lockdown in Wales. They're coming off the weekend, but then in the UK they're not yet, or in England they're not yet. They're saying there could be another wave. We don't know what's around the corner. So how can we deal with that? And the complexity, that's always a good word. I always struggle a little bit with that word, because what's complex for one person may be not complex for another. It could be simple. And obviously the ambiguity, people misinterpret. So on the right-hand side, one of the good start points is this kind of framework, which actually is the Welsh word that means habitat. And it says that when you look at an initiative, which domain are we sitting in? Is it as clear-cut as picking one? That it's simple, something we just know what we're going to do? Is it complicated in the sense that there's some moving parts, but we've got a pretty good idea, we do best practices? Is it complex where we're going, well, I'm actually not too sure about doing this, so we need to do some investigation? Or is it really chaotic? Now, as somebody who's worked in this industry, IT, and in business for a long time, I can probably sit into all of those. I have been in chaotic, where I used to write real-time systems, and suddenly to do with controlling power, and suddenly there's a situation, and people start losing power. What are we going to do? So suddenly we can't, well, we think we know what we're going to do. We're not entirely sure. But the key thing is that if you're in the middle, which is the starting point, which is disorder, if you don't know where you are, how can you actually adopt anything and move forward? So we need to have some decision-making of what's we're trying to do here. If we're going to adopt Agile, where does that fit in the kind of framework? So if we now look at the entire scope of change, we could end up with elements in all four. So can we simply take it and go, it's here? Probably not. So we need to take a step back. And we say, well, what's it all based on? So now we're going to go back, and you probably heard, and you might be familiar with the Agile Manifesto. And it was all really driven around requirements, you know, that and the problem with requirements. And if you go back to look at things like the standards report, it's always requirements that are a problem. And so a lot of requirements that are written down, you're not going to need. Or rather, you might need them, but they're not as important as other requirements. And if you write them all down and you simply go to a development team and say, do it, they'll pick what they think is the most appropriate, and they'll fit it together, and then they'll deliver it. But there's no sort of coordination. And then when you deliver it, you find that a lot of requirements are never used. So take Microsoft Word. Think how much of Microsoft Word that you actually use. Now, Microsoft will keep updating the application, but do you actually going to use those new features? Possibly not. So why, if we're in a business and we want to get our products written and out to market, why are we concentrating on things that people not necessarily want? So when we go back to the quicker, maybe we mean quicker by actually focusing on what we think is the most important thing. It's not quicker that you're going to get everything quicker. It's quicker the fact you're going to get what you want. But that's not the way it necessarily is interpreted. But we need to put this in place. Now, this is some statistics that came out, the reasons for adopting Agile. And let's go. If you look at them, and we put the links there so you can go and find this out, and look at the key ones. Accelerate software delivery. Well, that sort of makes sense because software is a key word. It's in everybody's sort of vocabulary now, and that's where Agile came from. But let's go below that. Changing priorities. So business. Increased productivity. Business. Improved business IT alignment. Interesting. Business and IT. Bit of contention. How do we get them aligned so they're working together? So they are key, and we go down a little bit further. Delivery predictability. When are we going to get it? Because you're feeding into business as usual, and you're looking for benefit returns. So these reasons are quite a good start point. And if you look from your own world, in your own business, which of these maybe are the problem? Which is the reason? Why are we doing it? But also, if we're doing it, what are we going to get? Now, if we go to the next slide, and I put up the benefits, look at the top one, changing priorities, very close to the other one. In other words, the environment you're working in is changing. How are you going to react to that? Project visibility, well, that's an interesting one. That's like communication. People are aware of what's happening, so people don't get caught out by surprise. Business and IT alignment, still up there. Time to market. A lot of focus on the business side. And yet, if we go down the bottom, we start talking a bit about software maintainability. So we're looking at, the business can sort of see what they want, but how do they get there? So to understand the Agile approach, I want to take you the Agile, I call it the Agile journey. In the 70s, business computing was expensive. Most sort of computers were in either research or they're in sort of universities, and they were like big calculators. So the business didn't see a lot of use, apart from when they started to hold storage, which was like magnetic tape. They could hold state. So that's a good idea, but they really didn't see anything. And then as we moved on and peripherals started to get created, and in towards the 80s, it meant that they could start looking at the way they worked and maybe automating, because they were relating this blend back to, say, production lines, which is like the likes of Toyota, and say, well, maybe we could do the same things with our workflows, but at the same time, we're beginning to get internal applications like payroll, personnel, etc. As the programming and application thing started to grow, the other thing that changed was communication. So there was this business globalization. And with it came, we're going to focus on making our business grow, because there was a lot of competition out there. And therefore, you started to get this conflict between the business and IT. So the bears before, the business and IT, and it wasn't called IT, but if you like, the engineering guys plus the business would work together, suddenly there was this gap because the business were focusing on selling and getting their products out there and saying, well, will you do this? But if you think about it, there was a lot of innovation. So IT were experimenting and going, we're not too sure whether we can do this or not. But the business were going off in a different direction and didn't really want to put the time into it. And in the 90s, the growth was such that the business became, we don't want to get involved. So therefore, different roles started to appear, such as the systems analyst was already there, then the business analyst, the project manager, and the developer, the person actually building the solution, got further and further away from the business people, which meant that they said, well, when we deliver it, it's what they thought they wanted, but you hadn't spoken to them. And then something happened around just into the 90s. Somebody thought, we're getting quite close to the year 2000, Y2K. And the whole of the business focus changed to survival. And there was not a lot of innovation. But what actually happened was in the mid-80s to the 90s, IT were developing approaches to writing software to allow them to try and keep pace to deliver to the business. So that came to the forefront because they had to get this done by the year 2000. It couldn't wait. You had this millennium. Now, you may or may not remember when you get the year 2000, and it went over into the new century, and nothing really happened. But the word software was now in everybody's minds. It's in everybody's lips. The word, everything, the focus had changed. So in 2001, they came out with the Agile Manifesto, which said, we're focused on software development. Hey, we never want that to happen again. And of course, everybody said, no, we never want that to happen again. So this is how we're going to do it. And if you look at the principles, the 12 principles were there to basically deal with situations in projects which had become a problem, such as business people and developer work together on a daily basis. So when they put it together, they said, well, that's what we're going to do. And then from 2001 onwards, they said, well, if it works for software, let's apply it to projects and to the business. And then, like everything else, it's then who can sell their products. And there it came about. We sell it cheaper, quicker, less defects and better quality. And suddenly the business see it as a magic solution. But what does it really give us? It really says that business and IT will integrate. It's a business solution we're dealing with, not an IT solution. So the manifesto, although it says working software in the manifesto, it's really replace that with a working solution. There's also mutual respect. The fact that the business and IT respect each other's skill sets. And there's a joint ownership of the product and the objectives. So this is really what the agile mindset is. It's not an us and them. And it's about working together. And the question is, does it replace everything that came before? Well, if we're dealing with software, how many projects do you work on are purely software? Not many, if any. So the business still have to maintain their focus. We get opportunities through the benefit realization and maintain business as usual. But IT has still got to be inventive because they're dealing with new technology, etc. They've got to integrate. And that's where you may have come across the word hybrid, which is the traditional wrapper. Now, the word wrapper is the word that I use, which says for a development team to work, we need this wrapper, which is basically like the governance, the platform. And when we get that right, it allows the solution to build. But with the integration, it means you're building it together. So when we go back to apply it to a business, what business problem are we actually looking to fix? It's a question. Rather than just go and buy something off the shelf, what are we looking to fix? One of the biggest issues I find in business cases, they do not state what the problem is they want to fix. They say what they like, and so when things get delivered, it didn't fix it. And also, is there a problem at all? Because if there isn't, why do you need to fix it? So the start point, now this is called the Pop-It model, and it comes from business analysis, and it's from the BCS. I like it because it shows the 4 if you like, call it domains. That we're not looking at one element. We've got to think for our solutions, no longer software, we're looking at 4 areas. We've got to look at the whole organization so they understand the approach. We've got to look at the processes because we're going to maybe be working in a different way. We've got to look at the people, get them to understand the roles and responsibilities. And IT is also there as well because they're going to provide a solution. It's an integrated solution. So the puppet model is a nice way to start. Just turning around and saying, look, when we're building the solution, these are the things we need to think about. So adopting Agile isn't about going to one of them, it's about all of it. Once we've gone through that, we then have to consider where are we going to trigger the Agile approach. And what do I mean by that? Can't pick it up and simply plug it in. What you're going to say is, can we apply it to the whole organization? Well, that's a big change. And history says that doesn't really work. Now, you may have heard like the Big Bang when they said IT always developed Big Bang. Actually, that never was the case. Often IT wanted to develop, but there's very few times in a business life cycle in a year where they can actually adopt something cleanly because they've got resource issues, might be the end of financial years. So to take a big change on is difficult. So let's look at where we could focus. Let's do a proof of concept. So here we have our current state and our final state. So look for that gap. So we do like strategy analysis, the as is the target, investigate, analyze, recommend. Pick an area that's going to be beneficial, one that deals with change, one that's you feel is positive to maybe work in a different way. Maybe they're struggling at the moment. And build your business case to work out how are you going to measure success. So when you adopt whatever form of Agile you want, whichever framework you use or a combination, how are you going to measure? Because if you're then successful, was it due to the approach or was it because you did something different? Maybe the market changed. So we need to make this business case solid and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do. So again, you can look at history and find out why businesses don't succeed on their return on investment and say, but how can we tie this directly back to an Agile approach? Even if we start at the beginning and say, let's look at these areas, we can start to introduce the behavior and the mindset. We can introduce techniques to some of them are very familiar to you, like a backlog. Now, these are terms, they're labels, information radiators, and the list can go on and on. But what you can do is you can show somebody what a backlog, or for example, I could show you a business model canvas, which comes out of the IIBA, which is the business analyst. So a dashboard. It's like an information radiator, but maybe people haven't seen this. Maybe they've only seen a Gantt chart and they don't like them. Show them a backlog. So as a way you can introduce, say, you see this, but this is something else you could do instead. So really right at the beginning, when we're selecting initiatives, we can start to introduce techniques that are seen as effective. Now, these techniques, unproven techniques, because they've been around a long time and they work. And we then can promote the Agile approach, which is our deliverable. If we're there to adopt Agile, let's think of it as a deliverable. And these words, respect, I've mentioned, they mean the commitment. And what I mean by commitment, I mean as a genuine commitment. I'm going to quote actually from Prince 2, which is after they do the initiation, say, so we can get a genuine commitment, not just people nodding, yeah. So you know, the genuine commitment is important. If you've got one person there that isn't committed to what you do, then it's going to pull it down. We focus, you know, we make certain we focus. This is what we're doing. So you're trying to control going off at tangents and scope creep. I'm certain you're familiar with this. And the openness, which means that you're not worried about making sort of mistakes and getting some sort of feedback that say, hey, we're going to blame you. But when I work as a project manager, I actually say to the teams, you don't work for me. I'm doing the work you don't necessarily want to do. I'm the barrier between you and the business. But you tell me, if you tell me an estimate, I'm going to include it. I'm not going to change the estimate because you're the expert, not me. So it's also the business has got to appreciate that what we're telling them from a solution perspective is also respect their particular view. That's how long it's going to take. But of course, the business have got their own pressures. So we force this negotiation. The courage is just to put people together and make certain that, yeah, not take a chance, but let's go forward in a different direction to make it work. And I like this from the planning. So this planning comes from what they call Agile PM, which is called DSDM. So this was, again, an Agile approach. You may or may not have seen it. So they went up the mountain on 2001. There were 17 guys went up the mountain, and they were one of them. This is the only Agile approach that deals with the life cycle. But what I like about it is, look at the point, we got the word project. We take a project, so it's an initiative. Let's divide it into chunks. We call them project increments. Each chunk has got a tick, which means there's like a release point. And we break that down into time boxes. They use the word time box. If you do Scrum, use the word sprint. Same thing. It's an iteration. And you break it down like that. But below it, what we got to consider: business alignment, the governance, benefit realization, the return. When can get return on investment? It's not at the end. What about operations? We're going to support it. And the knowledge areas we need to consider are on the right-hand side. Those are familiar with PMP, and they've just brought out a new version of PMP, where they've included a lot of Agile in it, because they recognize this approach has to be integrated. There's your governance areas. So what it's saying is, if I look at that diagram, feasibility is, do I want to do the job? Foundations is what approach you're going to take, and let's consider all these areas. It's nothing to do with the fact is it's about development. It's about creating that wrapper that allows the development team to do the work. So when you get to the first time box, you've already got the control in there. Now, it doesn't mean like it's command and control. It's not somebody telling somebody what to do. It's saying, we're giving you the environment that allows you to do your job to the best of your ability. And when you do it, you're going to be working with the right people, including a business representative. So that's where the integration part comes. And so this is a technique that comes out of Scale Agile Framework. And I like it because it's what actually we tried to do in the 70s, 80s, that sort of period. But now they put it in SAFe, which says, hey, we'll get everybody together. If you look at the second paragraph, 2 full events every 8 to 12 weeks. You got the roles there. We talk about development teams. They mentioned, obviously, Agile terms like engineers, UX teams, user experience, but everybody attends in person. It's like a giant workshop. It's terrific. And it's communication, visibility, collaboration. Everybody's in that room. And when you come out of that room and you've done some planning, you've got some estimates, you've got a structure, it's very difficult for anyone then to later on say, we don't agree with it, because they were party to it. And so again, we can use our approaches, our workshops, our focus groups. You may have come across planning poker as a way of doing estimates. That's just a technique like live band Delphi, but it's in the room. And therefore, you create that energy. And now having the people in the same room together, that starts making the respect element sort of visible to everybody. And they start getting the respect of each other. But it also means you see the conflicts. And conflicts is not a bad thing. If a business wants something and the development team, the techie guy said you can't have it because, and they're going to have a big argument, but they can see each other's viewpoint. So the key thing is the facilitator. And that's really the strength. It's not a battle, it's about, look, you understand each other's viewpoints. Let's break it down and make it work, guys. We're all in the same boat together. So this technique, I wanted to include something like this to say there is a lot of stuff out there that you can use. So that's a great way of planning. And when we talk about the governance is the mindset. You get this genuine commitment. And then we want this continuous top-down support delivery, bottom-up, sideways. Everybody's in together. And you apply the rules. So if there are standards like regulation, everybody's aware of them. Right? So when it comes to better quality, hey, we already know what they are. So you're creating the wrapper. And that wrapper, as it shows there, allows the people in the middle building the solution to work together, and they're focused. But the key point is educate, work with the Agile mindset in mind. which means that if there are changes, they recognize that you do have to go through some kind of change control, but it can be quite dynamic, and you're going to empower people. So when they talk about command and control, people telling people what to do, you will do this, you will do that. Okay, that's one way of working, and sometimes that might have to happen. But the most important thing is you put people together and you say, like, let's work it out. But you give them the environment that allows you to do that. Once we've gone on, we look at the stakeholders. So again, I took this from Scaled Agile Framework. At the very bottom, it mentions Scrum, because Scaled Agile Framework was put together based around Scrum at the bottom. Scrum is this one approach. Scrum came about specifically in one area of a business environment where they had trouble getting the business people involved. You may have come across extreme programming. That's where that's also an agile approach where you had to work very closely with the people, say, building equipment. So you had to work almost in pairs alongside each other. That's where user stories came from. DSDM, which shows you AgilePM, came from an environment where they were using, if you like, a more of a traditional approach. They didn't want a big leap, but they wanted to integrate. So all these agile approaches came from a particular style of working. And then the manifesto came back and said, there you go. And this is what were principles we're going to follow. A Scaled Agile Framework is a great way of showing stakeholders. It shows that line of communication. There's your team. So the Agile team, delivering quality, team lead, there's a product owner. Product owner is a word now that everybody throws around. We need product owners. They represent the business. But a product owner can be at multiple levels. And the one at the top, right at the very top there, the epic owner could be a product owner, and they will nominate the person below and below that until eventually you get to the dev team, and whatever functionality they're doing, you're getting the right person in the team to help them. So there's a lot of work involved with stakeholder management, but they've all got a role to play, as opposed to it being filtered down from the top and you then provide a solution. It doesn't sort of match up. Once you've got that and you're starting to build, how do you get it to go live? Well, you've heard of, may have come from ITIL, where they've got release management, and DevOps, which means we've got our signed off product, we're going to go into operations, which is fine. We can throw it over the fence. It goes through DevOps, it goes live. But how's the business going to react? Maybe you've had a situation where you've come to work and turned on your system and found the screen different. Think, well, where did that come from? Or maybe you go into Facebook, suddenly find a whole new screen. Oh, we've updated the system. Wouldn't it be quite nice to know? So this comes from Managing Successful Programs, right, which is an Axos qualification, same stable as Prince 2. I like it because it talks about something that has to happen in parallel with development. It's a transition. So we have the pre-transition, communicate the change, tell people something's coming, the readiness for change. One of the issues in the 80s and 90s was the business were never ready to take something on because they were always too busy. So they kept delaying and delaying and delaying. And that's why you ended up with a big bang going out at the end. It wasn't because it wasn't ready to be delivered. It was the business just couldn't take it on. So we need to consider the transition in parallel development. So we talk about this is what's coming. Then you do the transition and manage the outcomes. And then see the post-transition is there realization? Did we get the expected benefits? Now, the key for this is who's going to do it? And we need owners of benefits, which goes back to the business case. So they've got responsibility to demonstrate that what they've been delivered will give them the ROI. But the other thing you have to have is to make certain that whoever you're delivering it to doesn't revert back to the old way of working. Because then you're never going to get a true sort of ROI review, because it's going to say, well, we're still doing the old way. So we're not successful, but we didn't like the new way. So basically, there's this parallel work going on alongside development. So this also can be, for example, put on a backlog. But it's maybe a different team working on it. So that's your transition. But what can go wrong? Of course, it's always going to be the question, isn't it? What can go wrong? And we've got at the top left, setting priorities and applying value. we have to help the business do this. What's important? Now, one technique I will do is I will get the items on the backlog, give it to the business people, and I'll say, what's the most important thing for you? And they'll come up with, I'll do it in a sequence. The thing at the top, like a backlog, is the most valuable. Then I ask them to put a measure on it, which of course will tie back to the business case and the benefits. And that's quite a struggle. How do we apply? We're not quite sure. So we need to help them with that. But at the same time, I can give the same backlog to the technical guys, and they'll do the same thing. And then you marry the two together, and things that then might be that the thing the business puts the most value on is actually the simplest. But the point is they both understand. I can put them in the same room, either PI planning, and it works out. A concern, the second box. Management, senior management, business think they're going to lose control. Because, we like to tell the IT guys what to do, because IT used to disappear in the corner, because that's where project management was first documented. Was the fact is that they put it together based on construction, because they realized these people who work computers disappeared for months on end. We didn't know what they were doing. So now they put this control in place. We tell people what to do. And suddenly, no, you're going to do it yourselves. No, you're not, because they've got a representative in the team. So we need to. So but it's still the mindset change. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read them, but coordinating multiple teams. If you think about it, we did Agile was put together to write a bit of software, one team to write a bit of software, and suddenly it's gone beyond that. So we get two teams. What's going to happen? They got to coordinate. Somebody's got to do that. Hence why people like project managers their skill is still important. Another one I find quite is utilizing all the team skills in iteration, which is a middle one there, because when you're looking at the list, you put a team together and you want to get everybody busy, but it might be everything's focused on one particular aspect, and say some of the team are effectively redundant, they haven't got those skills. So that's another balancing act, and if you're not careful, the team itself can sort of struggle, or they say, well, we don't need these resources, you run into resource problems. But the other one is, I go back to this commitment. Customers are not able to commit. As well, okay, so we need somebody there from the business who will commit them. If you want to get a deliverable with the benefits, you've got to commit. So all of these different areas here are barriers. Like the traditional office environment, you can't change it. It was about 2 years ago, I was asked to do a session on agile procurement. And I said, what do you mean by that? Do you mean buy it as we go along? Well, what they meant was, how do we take our agile procurement process and actually fit it into a development which is quite fluid? And that was actually for a global organization. So we talked about it, and they began to realize, I put them all together in a room, we talked it through. So basically all this is key. But the other one where I think that we're beginning to get to, and where I've seen people getting concerned, is relying on agile tool to become agile. Now what it's probably my one point which I see. People used to rely on a plan, and it would be done, for example, like a Gantt chart. And suddenly the tool, which often was Microsoft Project, that's what everybody focused on. The PM would sit in front of that, and the tool would start driving the initiative. I'm beginning to see something similar, because people buy a tool like Jira. Nothing wrong with it at all, but suddenly Jira is driving what you do. And when you do that, you tend to start to lose. I'm seeing people losing focus on what Agile was all about. The mindset starts to go because somebody's updating it. So the control, don't let the tool overtake you, which is saying focus on delivery, ignoring the wrapper. You start focusing on development, you forget about the governance, but you've got to have that wrapper and maintain that wrapper. So this is the question to answer, really. Can we guarantee cheaper, faster, better quality? It's a strong word, isn't it? Guarantee. Well, the answer is, in my view, yes, it is achievable, but it has to be done with understanding of what that actually means to you and the cost of getting there. So cheaper could be you buy an alternative product. Faster, you focus on what you want, but maybe you won't get everything. Better quality was specifically about software defects. Now, not all software, but what does better quality mean? Well, we can marry that to, say, the number of complaints from a product. We can do it, but we've got to know what it means to you. That's what's in your business case. And Agile is not a solution. It's a change to the way the organization works. And it's important to get that across. And maybe it's part of the organization, or maybe the complete. But to actually do it all in one go, straight from the beginning, is going to be impossible. People like to see. Let me give an example. If Microsoft came out, for example, with a new Windows product, which is fix all the problems that ever existed, would you load it up on your own PC, laptop? Probably not. You might want to wait. Some people will, some people won't. Some people never load it up. It's the same thing, isn't it? We need to find out where it's going to be the most effective, show it works, and gradually bring people on board, because there are going to be the doubters. So it's not a tap you can just turn on. You need that clear vision of why you are moving to Agile and the business goals. Back to the very top. What does it mean? And we need to involve employees from every area of the business to buy in and ownership. They've got to not be scared to turn around and go and say, I want to try this, or this is a great idea. Let's look at the manufacturing side. Kanban. That's part of the Agile. Kaizen, getting everybody to contribute with improvements. Because they recognize it, that everybody recognizes it's for the team. The business recognizes these improvements for the team, and people recognize that. So that's what we need to try and get across. And you can do this in workshops, whatever, but we have to take a step back and say to the business, if you want to do this, you've got to commit. So we're going to run workshops and we're going to educate, but this is what needs to be done. So this presentation was just to give you some ideas, right? It shows you can't find the magic dust, but you can create your own magic. And I mean that. So look at the guidance from the best practice frameworks that exist. Look at all the different frameworks. Look at Scrum and Kanban. Look at PMI. Look at Prince2. Look at MSP. They're all there for a reason. And that's why we're showing you these different elements come from different places. We bring it together. And why do they exist? Because they work. Nearly every technique you use has got a history that demonstrates it worked. And what we do is we take a technique and make it work in our environment. That's what it's most important to do. You've got to make it work in your environment. You work in the environment they were created for. It's like if you were trying to use a tool like a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, it isn't going to work very well. You might get away with it. So we need to look at overall. So don't pick one framework and work in a silo. Look at all of them. Create your own wrapper to establish the governance and the flexibility. Change the employee mindset, include them. Get the learning culture, measure your results, but measure them properly. And start small and demonstrate the success. But start looking at what you currently do. And you really may be more agile than you think. And I see that more and more. People think they're changing, but there's a lot that you do already. Otherwise, your business itself would not exist. We just need to harness that and put it into your world. So it was triggered at the start by saying, well, what can we find? And there's this course that came out, which is actually the BCS Foundation Certificate. It's quite a new course. And when I was asked to look at it, it went through my head, why am I looking at another course for Agile, another bit of paper? But when I looked at it, I realized that it was a great start point, because it talks about what Agile is really all about, or rather the concept of Agile, which came in 2001, which was bringing all those different frameworks together and saying, look, this worked for this environment, but let's look at those principles. And it gave this background. So it gives you a great baseline from which to move forward. So if you want to move then to go and look at any of the other frameworks, at least you understand where the background is and what you're trying to do. So it doesn't exclude them. It says it involves developing knowledge of many aspects of Agile methods and in concern with the use of Agile practices in projects. So it's got about 14 activities in it. It's a 2-day course. And so it's quite a practical course, which is what I like. So we talk about the factors that drive Agile adoption. So you know what it is. So you can actually say, this is what we're trying to do and why it was adopted in the first place. And we look at the different roles. People want to know what role they play. Well, look at them. There's different roles you can play. It's not just about product owner, scrum master, and developer. There's lots of other roles. You've all got like the UX, the CX, lots of other things come into play now. And we are going to look at the common Agile practices. So to me, this course was, when I looked at it, I realized that compared to many where we're picking one, this one gave me the start point. It says the foundation on which to build business agility at all levels. It's a start point. And there's a link to it. So that was really the trigger for this particular presentation. And Learning Tree do a whole range. Alison put this in to show, look, she's a coordinator at Learning Tree and said, this is our curriculum. We work together and we put this in place. So there's lots of things like that with a link. You could go and look at the courses. So you've got this Agile journey. Well, you've got your journey here, and whichever route you go on, you can speak to the guys at Learning Tree and they'll say, look, try this course or that course. You can discuss your needs and focus it from there. So, Alison, was that okay? Happy with that?
Yeah,
Still smiling?
Thank you so much, John. Thank you. Now, we've had some questions during the presentation, but if you hadn't asked your questions yet, please do so, everybody. Please put them in the chat pod and we'll put them to John at the end of this session. In the meantime, for those of you who have already participated in webinars before, our classes through Learning Tree, you'll be able to access this webinar recording through your My Learning Tree account. For anyone who's new to Learning Tree, you would have been set up with a My Learning Tree account by registering for this webinar. In the next few days, you'll receive a follow-up email from us with the details of how to activate your account and how to get access to the recording of this webinar. So just sharing that with you in case you want to replay and listen to it again or share it with some colleagues. So back to the questions. Okay, so first question for you, John. Is Agile development the same as Agile project management? And if not, what do you consider to be the difference?
Agile development, basically it came out of software development. So that's like when businesses had to come up with a solution, there was obviously an element of IT involved. So Agile development grew out of software development, but Agile project management is really creating the wrapper to allow that development to go ahead in a successful way. So it integrates. So the project management element is making certain that the developers have got the right environment and they're protected, if you like, from the business. So in other words, it's a controlled flow in, and so they agree what's going to be done and they're allowed to focus rather than have an uncontrolled chaos, if you like, which is the kind of framework. Okay? Thanks,
John. Now we also have Christelle saying she didn't quite get the meaning of wrapper. So could you just reiterate around wrapper?
Right. When it's a word that I sort of use because if I've got a team of developers and they're focusing on what they're going to do in the next period of time, which could be sprint for Scrum or time box, they can't simply, they talk about self-organizing teams, but they can't seem to be let loose. If you've got multiple teams all doing their own thing. So the wrapper says, what do they need to have in place? So you're going to have some kind of infrastructure in place. So you're working off a common sort of backlog, for example. So there's got to be a management backlog. There's got to be, if there's standards in place, they've got to follow the right standards, which sort of fits under quality. There might be risks involved. So basically they're aware of the risks. So the wrapper is that governance area. And if you take the 10 knowledge areas of PMP, that's not a bad place to start and say, this is the wrapper to allow the development team to focus on what they've got to do. So therefore that allows the control. So a dev team can still do their thing, but within this sort of protected environment. It stops the business then coming and saying to the team, right, go and do this or go and do that. So that's just my term is the wrapper. It's the governance or the circle that goes around it. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, John. Now, to answer Rachel's question, the training that John was describing is available for both individual learners and for groups from one organisation, so we can support you either if it's an individual who needs training or you have a group of people in your organisation who needs training, and we can certainly support you in both aspects. Now, Alan's question is there still a role for a sponsor, or is the now fulfilled by the product owner?
Well, that's a good question. The sponsor, if we talk about sponsor, I always think of the word sponsor. Well, I always think of it in any initiative, there are three key roles. There's the person who's going to pay for it. Okay. There's the person who's going to use it. And there's the person who's going to build it. So it's basically the three. So it's like the business, the user, and supplier. I refer to it as the bus. And if you haven't got a bus, that's the vehicle. If you haven't got a bus, it's going nowhere. So if we take the sponsor, what's the role of the sponsor? So if you've got the word product owner, and the product owner in the Agile represents the business, where do they sit? The sponsor, at the end of the day, has got to find the money. They're likely to be at the top. Then the sponsor might well say, right, we're going to nominate somebody to then go to the next level down, which is, say, to get involved in the project itself, because a sponsor could be from, say, a steering committee. And then they drop down until they get to the development team, and there's, again, the product owner in there. So the product owner is the person who's the best person to represent the business in that particular part of the team. So if I've got a development team, say they're developing, say I'm doing a payroll system and somebody's doing the absence recording, the product owner in the team is somebody who understands absence recording. Whereas a sponsor normally is somebody who's going to look at the business's money and concerned with the governance of the money and the funding side. So the answer I would say is yes, there is, because they're fulfilling a slightly different role. To me, the sponsor, the product owner could be at multiple levels, but the sponsor to me is the guy finding the money. So yes, there is, but it's a matter of working in your environment and saying, well, what does that role mean? And what are the roles and responsibilities, really? But I agree with you. The word product owner is now being thrown around. Anybody who involved is just a product owner, which, okay. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, so a question from Gary, John. How do you adapt people who think they are being agile when they are only cutting the scope of what is developed and not necessarily implementing the highest value items first?
All right. This is where, if you like, I say as a facilitator, it's a matter of saying, if you've got people who are like that, actually saying, if you're doing this, what's the impact? And if you don't do it, what's the impact? So in other words, what we're saying is, if they're just cutting the scope of work, if you tie it back to the benefit and they realize the impact. So if you do an impact, basically I would use a technique like an impact analysis. Say if you're doing this or you're doing that, and almost run like a little workshop with them to try and educate them on what they're doing. If they're just cutting what's being developed and not implementing the highest value, then what's the impact? So I would just simply take them and have like a little focus group and go through just to show, almost like a little scenario, basically, saying this is what you're doing, but might be a better way of doing it. But let them discover it themselves, if that makes sense. So that's how I dealt with it before. Simply just do a little workshop with them and look for and just trying to say, oh, that's a better way of doing it.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, so back to Christelle's questions about Rapper. She asked about guidelines.
Okay. I think the best place to go, well, there's two places you could go, really. You could go and look at PMI. I put the knowledge areas from PMI, which is the PMBOK, the Guide to Project Management. So PMBOK is a good one. But there's also one called the Praxis Framework. I might put it in the chat box for you, actually. I'll put in my... excellent. If you go there, this is also, it's a recognized technique, recognized method. Have a look in there and actually gives you a sort of a roadmap, really, of those particular areas. So PMI is one element, but go and look in that one. It's got a really good picture of what's in there. It's actually got the methods, it's got competencies, but it actually shows you the governance areas. If you search for governance, it'll come up with a list of those areas, okay? So that's not a bad place to go. All right, Alan obviously is, Alan 2, I'll just look at chat, but Alan 2 is obviously a fan of Praxis.
Okay, and then asking John about the BCS Foundation Certificate. What's the next training step after doing the BCS Foundation Certificate in Agile? Where should people go after that?
Right. I think with that it's really, if you look at what do you want to achieve. So, for example, you could do that and say, so we could compare. So you don't get an understanding of, say, Kanban, Scrum, DSDM. Say, right, what should we do next? Now, if you felt that you wanted to go to not so much the development, let's say you felt that the best approach might be to work and move towards the management side or the value side, you could look at something like IC Agile qualification, which is in the roadmap, and they've got, for example, a product ownership track, or they've got a product delivery track. So I think it's really that this BCS Agile gives you this platform to allow you to make a sensible choice about which direction that you want to go in. It's not a straight line, but I would, if you do your analysis of the business and say, if we're going to go agile, what do we want to focus on? It might be you want to focus on the business side. I'd be going down the IC Agile route and looking at, say, product ownership. If I'm saying I want to concentrate on the development side, then you can look at either Scrum, something like that, or again, one of the IC Agile qualifications. So I would look and see what's going to give the most value to the business. Where do you think? Okay, that's what I'd go for. So one size doesn't fit all. I mean, it's.
Okay, so Eddie's asking, what is the difference between Scrum and Agile project management?
Okay, AgilePM came out of something called DSDM, which is Dynamic System Design Methodology. And it was basically an approach where somebody was using a traditional approach. It wasn't such a large leap, but it allowed the development team to actually have this sort of protection. So AgilePM has what they call the foundation, feasibility, which is, do you want to do the project? Foundation, which is like planning, which is equivalent to like sprint zero. Then they have what they call evolutionary development. And then they have deployment. And evolutionary development is actually the same as really Scrum. So basically, the Scrum would sit inside DSDM, or what they call AgilePM. Right, so Scrum is focused on the development part. AgilePM gives you some of the governance as well. For example, AgilePM will talk about business case and planning. Okay?
Great, thanks.
So I can use DSDM or AgilePM. Yeah, I was going to say I can use AgilePM and use Scrum inside it if I want. But I could do that with Prince2 or PMP or any of the others. So, yeah.
Okay, so your next questions, John. So I have an Agile Foundation, but I noticed there's also an Agile for Business certification with an exam. Is this worth doing, the Agile for Business certification? And I would also like to do a change management certification. Is this worth, as a project manager now have a familiarity with change management?
I think that when you say Agile Foundation, it depends on which certificate it is. Is it focused on one particular approach, like Scrum or whatever? If it is just on one of them, then I think the Agile for Business, what that does, it means you're looking more at the choosing of the right initiative and the roles and responsibilities at business level. Change management, I think, is very worth doing, because at the end of the day, a project introduces change, and it's actually business change. So if you do change management, it'll move you towards understanding a little bit about initiatives like portfolio management as well. So I think that a lot of PMs I work with and talk to, and I've sort of helped them and said, look, change management is a good thing to do. I would probably go for change management rather than Agile for Business. I would do that first, to be honest. I think it just takes you into a different world there. Okay.
Great. Well, just thank you for that, John. I think that is all the questions got posted. I'll just give a couple of seconds in case anyone wants to post any additional questions. We just might have one coming in now, John.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I say it's only a short period, but hope.
No, just thank yous coming in, John. So, John, thank you so much. And someone's asking, has anyone taken Praxis? Yes, there's been some people have taken Praxis, haven't they, John?
Yes, they have. A few people have. Yeah. Great.
In that case, thank you everyone so much for joining John this afternoon, and us this afternoon for 1 hour. It's been really informative, John, so thank you. Lots of thank yous coming in the chat pod. We hope to see you all very soon on future webinars with Learning Tree. And we look forward to sharing them with you very soon. Okay, thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.